Okay, welcome to part 2 of the Wolverine task as part of the Graphical Techniques Unit 1 for the Graphic Design Award Level 2. In the first Wolverine task tutorial, I showed you how to create the head of Wolverine using the Nodes tool and the Bezier curves, which is a really useful graphical technique to have in the locker when creating dynamic graphics. What I've gone and done is just to make this task sort of slightly more differentiated. For those of you who want to continue doing it freehand, you can do. What I've also done here is created a kind of template of my original Wolverine. I will have exported this and dropped it into Dropbox so you can actually download it and import it into Inkscape to act as a kind of tracing tool if you find that creating your own body and everything like that is just a little bit too tricky. What I'm going to show you is how we use that this particular template to create the rest of him, which I imagine in principle will speed this tutorial up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get him over the template to hover over my head, and obviously because I want to use it as a tracing tool, I'm going to go to Object at the top here and I'm going to lower it to bottom. So basically what that then means is I've stacked it right to the bottom of the sort of layers in Inkscape so that I can then just use it for tracing. Now it's not quite inline, so I use my arrow, my down arrow on my keypad, and I'll just move that into a more appropriate place, and then I'm going to zoom in. And one of the things about the tracing, if we're going to trace, is having the grid in place is going to be a bit of a pain because it will constantly snap to those sections. So I'm just going to go to View and get rid of the grid, and I'm then going to go to my Bezier Curves tool. And what I'm now going to do is literally point to point, I'm going to go along the lines of the template. It's snapping to the guides as well, so I'm just going to get rid of that middle guide as well by pressing delete, and I am going to go round the edges. Now basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you halfway through here to complete this task, because I think that once I've shown you how to get aspects of this done, I won't need to really show you a great deal more other than obviously moving things down layers like I'm about to do now. So if I go to Object here to get that behind his head, I'm just going to go to Lower, and that's put him into place. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so that I've got a bit more grounding on a little bit more focus on the actual body, and then I'm just going to do the outline of his body using the outlines I've got available. If these lines are obviously a little bit too jagged, you know that you can make them symmetrical using the Symmetrical Nodes tool at the top. A little trick could be to make sure that your body is absolutely symmetrical, is rather than do the entire body, is bisect him and just do half. And when you flood fill him, now I'm just using the color dropper tool here, pick colors from image, just to make sure that the yellow is exactly the same. What I can do is duplicate him by right clicking and duplicating, pressing H on my keypad, and I'll move that across so that I've now got his whole body in place without having to go around the whole thing. Select both of them, both elements, and join them together, and I'm just going to lower section below, and as you can see even the collar is a little bit too jagged, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, edit pass by nodes, and I'm just going to make these elements a little bit more symmetrical. Pull that about a bit so it's a bit neater and tidier. Make that more symmetrical, and this one also. That should make it a little bit more curved as a collar. In the event that obviously this is below the collar, I can just stretch this node here up by just selecting it and moving it upwards with my left button on my mouse, and I'll zoom out a little bit, and I can obviously tidy these up again. Same principle, just make these nodes curved by making them symmetrical using this tool here. Now what I'm going to leave you with now, these are the basic principles, or the main principles to creating Wolverine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this and complete this tutorial so that you can see what the end result should look like, but I'm hopefully going to leave you to crack on with this. and complete the Wolverine task. Right, hi there. I'm moving through this particular task and I'm thinking to myself, right, well, we've got the template in place, that will make the little task a little easier. And once you've done the body, I imagine the question would be, well, I've done the body, but I can't see the belt. How do I get the belt? And what is going to be the best route by which we can get this done? Well, there is actually a very straightforward process. Now, as you remember, we pushed the template the template right to the back. What we can do is bring that up for momentarily by selecting it, going to Object and raise to the top. So now obviously you can't see your original, your own Wolverine, but what we can do is use the template momentarily to create ourselves a belt by using the Bezier tool, and just go dot to dot, fill it black, select your template and go Object lower to bottom, and what you should have then is obviously your belt in place. Now if it's not accurate, so you can then obviously stretch the nodes into place, which will allow you to be able to place your belt in a more even position across your graphic. So that's the first thing I would notice, and then I'll have a look at the other elements of this graphic, and I think, right, well, we've got all the kind of basic borderline shapes in place. What about the shading? How do you do the shading, Ben? Right, well, the way I would do that is naturally I'm going from light to darker to even darker, so I'm just going to select the crown at the top here, and what I'm going to do is a kind of freehand process. So I'm just going to go round the edges to about halfway, and this is a nice quick process. Hit my nodes tool at the top there, and I'm just going to make a few of them more curvy. Like so. I think, one of the things to be careful of, and if your handles, if you make sure that obviously you've got your Bezier handles available, is that if you do have one that, like a curve there, that's really arched, then you can actually bend the handles out or in to make them even more steep as a curve, or obviously more shallow based on pulling them outwards for shallow and pull them inwards to make them more steep. So once you've got that in place, it's a case of going and getting a darker shade of yellow. So the way I would do that is I would just go down to my yellows here and find a darker version. And actually I don't want the outline on there, so I'm going to just click my paintbrush at the top here and just get rid of the stroke paint. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. I can see that there is obviously that little bit more shading needed, so I'm just going to create myself another layer to it so it looks a bit more shaded, and find a darker yellow. Take the stroke paint off, and I can just sort of work that around till I'm happy with the position of it and the size of it, obviously, so it looks a little bit more like shadows. I can then make those nodes curved. And that is the principle by which we shade our graphics to get a more kind of cartoony effect. It's the same principle that I've shown you here is the way I've generated these elements of shading in here and across his face. This is something that you can then get onto independently, I think. In terms of the outline, again, it's a very straightforward process of just making sure that you go around the outline of his body. It doesn't have to be dead on, because it is literally just a background colour to emphasize the black. So I'm going to very quickly finish that off as an example. Go around his eyes. I'm being very rough with it. I don't need to be particularly accurate because I want to keep that kind of cartoony, sketchy effect, so I don't want it being too clinical. And then if I colour it in, say, a dark grey, it's going to cover him up, but if I go to Object and lower to bottom, select my template because I don't need that anymore, I can move him around, that bottom layer around, to get him in better position. Zoom out, and what you might find is obviously you've still got those outlines, and this one's very clean. So if you select all of the graphic itself by just clicking and dragging, create that box and select it all, you can get rid of the paint strokes just by simply hitting the stroke paint tab, hitting the cross, and that will then leave you with Wolverine. If, for example, I'm just problem solving as I go through with the finished article, if the arms are sort of exactly the same colour as the body, just make them that little bit darker to accentuate them so that they do obviously look like a separate element. Now once that's done, you've created all your shading. The next process will be, as to the next tutorial, is to, I'm going to delete him because I don't need him for now, I'm going to just work with my original one, is to make him that little bit bigger, so make him quite large, and then File, Export, and export him at 300 dpi, so that he's quite a large document. And then I'm going to show you how to get this graphic looking even more flashy using a piece of software called GIMP. So I'm just going to very quickly get that across onto the desktop, call him Wolverine, and once that's then exported, I will move on to the next tutorial to show you how to get this final character edited in GIMP.